All right, I see some people starting to pile into the session right now. So I'd like to welcome everyone to the Shift Connect conference. I'm Travis Nickel, one of the students in the conference course this year. And on behalf of our class and professor, Dr. Ren Thomas, pleased to welcome you to this event on rural Indigenous broadband networks presented by the School of Planning at Dalhousie University. Dalhousie here, we are grateful to be able to live, work, and play on Mi'kma'ki, the traditional and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Yesterday at the opening of our conference, we had an elder in residence, Jerry Musqual LeBlanc, open our conference with a blessing, as she's done in previous years. I always really enjoy hearing Jerry speak. She's open for a number of years, a number of different things I've been to, and we hear not just the land acknowledgement, but the importance of being treaty people and what it means to be treaty people in the traditional land of Indigenous people. We'd also like to thank our sponsors, the Atlantic Planners Institute, the Licensed Professional Planners Institute of Nova Scotia, Turner Drake Partners, FBM, Fathom, ZAP, and the Dalhousie University President's Office. So a few quick details before we get started here. We're using the Zoom webinar software, which allows just our presenter to speak. So if you have any questions, we have a Q&A box at the bottom. You can enter questions in there and take a look at it as well. If you don't have questions, and you can upvote questions you'd like to hear answers. And as a moderator, or Rob will be our moderator today, and he will refer to them as well as some prepared questions for our presenters. So I'm going to introduce our moderator here and turn it over to our speakers. So we have Rob McMahon with us today. From the University of Alberta in the Media and Technology Studies Unit in the Department of Political Science, teaches in the Master of Arts in Communication and Technology program with focuses on adoption and uses of broadband and internet technologies by rural, northern, and Indigenous communities. His approach involves working with communities to ensure their voices are heard in all stages of research. He and his partners are exploring ways to house project data and build research capacities in communities and are involved in efforts to contribute to digital policy and regulation. He's also co-founded the First Mile Connectivity Consortium, a national nonprofit associated with community-based Indigenous broadband providers. So I'll turn it over to you, Rob, to get started.
Sure, thanks, Travis. Hi, everyone. Good to see you. I guess maybe to start, I have a bit of a presentation to talk a little bit about the First Mile Connectivity Consortium. But maybe we'll just do a quick round of intros so you know my colleagues who are also on the call with me. So maybe Penny, Tim, and Sally, if you could just do a quick introduction.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. My name is Penny Carpenter, and I'm the Director of Kakana Networks in Northwestern Ontario.
Good morning, everybody. Tim Wojtek, I'm Director of Technologies for the First Nations Education Council based in Wendake, Quebec.
Good morning, everyone. I am Sally Braun. I am the General Manager of the Western James Bay Telecom Network out of Moose Factory, Ontario.
Wonderful. Yeah, thanks, everyone. So Penny, Tim, and Sally are also all members of the First Mile Connectivity Consortium. So I'm kind of going to spend my time about 5 minutes or so, 5 to 10 minutes probably, just giving an overview of what the consortium does, some of the guiding principles, and then they can speak to their own context and work connecting Indigenous communities. So I just want to make sure everybody can see my screen here. It's just going to full screen mode now. Can you see a PowerPoint? Okay, wonderful. Great. So some of the guiding principles around this work are community-based digital ICT research. And so there's a strong focus on working alongside communities, working with communities, with the expertise that they hold in this area. So we'll hear from our other presenters today about the work they're doing to connect their communities, as well as in things like data analysis, data collection, and of course, co-presentation, co-authorship. We work with community partners to share the benefits of research. This includes stories, public outreach, as well as policy and regulatory intervention. So the four of us, myself and the three partners here and others, work very closely together to take research and then formulate that into policy and regulatory proposals. And then as well, we're very interested in creating and sharing toolkits. So things like digital literacy curriculum, workshops, and events like this today. One of the overarching goals of the work is this idea that deficiency models, that idea that there's a digital divide, and then there's groups that are either connected or disconnected. Sometimes that type of thinking fails to acknowledge the community strengths and assets and all the work going on the ground in the communities. And so we recognize that there are structural challenges around affordability, access, et cetera, but innovations are happening throughout communities and typically driven by communities for communities. So this kind of orients our work towards the enabling conditions of community-led technology development and broadband infrastructure deployment. So things like access, availability. So access to the infrastructure, is the physical infrastructure there? Availability, what are the services available on that infrastructure? Those are not always the same thing. Affordability, including data caps. So not just the affordability of consumer equipment or monthly costs, but also you have to pay more for the amount of internet services you use, which is sometimes the case in more of the more geographically remote or northern regions. And then adoption, right? Things like digital literacy. How are people taking up and using technologies? So this is where we focus our research and policy and communications activities. The idea of the first mile, it kind of flips on its head the common conception of telecommunications development, which calls the link between houses, right, the service provider, and then what are called the end users as the last mile. So engineers talk about that's the last point in the development process, right? So you actually build out to the community or to the individual user at the last stage. First mile inverts that, and we really work to put the communities first and argue that policies, practices, infrastructures should always be co-designed with, or even in some cases, designed by the groups that are directly affected. And so the theory of change associated with this is that regional and local digital networks that are designed and built with those community desires and needs as the starting point help support regional and local ownership and control of the infrastructure. That in turn contributes to a sustainable operational case for anchor tenants as well as residential providers. When I say anchor tenants, I mean things like schools, healthcare services, etc. And then that in turn leads to community training, local support staff, jobs, and then sustainable overall development. It touches, as we've seen in COVID-19, this touches on all aspects of life today. Everything from healthcare, economic development, land-based activities, pretty much all aspects of life are affected by digital technologies. And so you can see that this, in the context of COVID, has really come to light that, this is affecting various aspects of life. We also take a very holistic approach of thinking about technologies. So it's not just the individual households or users, but kind of goes up into community level services. How do you think about connectivity and infrastructure from the perspective of businesses, organizations, and then regional groups such as the three organizations on here with me today. And then also the surrounding lands, waters, and space, the environment, and our relationships with that. Just to give you an example of concrete work on the ground, I love this photo. It's from the Northwest Territories, showing some people there who actually laid out their conduit and installed fiber optic cables. You can imagine the ground's hard, it's cold, right? In this case, like when they were drilling down to do the conduit and lay the fiber, their equipment broke because of the cold. So I'm just showing you this is some of the conditions in the northern context that our partners and member organizations are working in, and actually going there and laying out fiber optics and putting up wireless connectivity in these kinds of conditions. Community networks are widespread across Canada. So this is showing a map. I think we've heard about, I would say, across Canada, about 80 or so stories like demonstrating local connectivity projects led by Indigenous communities. And I also want to point out that each of those community networking and technology projects are not individual or totally autonomous, right? They're working together with regional groups, like Tim's group, like Penny's group, like Sally's group. So there's like the local community level, and then they're collaborating and working together at the regional level through community intermediary organizations. So what do these regional groups do? They serve as a mediator between the local communities and then external entities like government funders, regulators, large corporations, that kind of thing. At the same time, there's a very strong link between the regional groups and then the local communities that represent and govern them. And then they use technologies to deliver public services, economic development opportunities. Long before COVID, they were using these technologies to deliver health and education and so on. And then they also do advocacy work to argue for more affordable, accessible internet services on behalf of communities. So a lot of this involves policy and regulatory engagement. We have a group across Canada. The First Mile Connectivity Consortium is a nonprofit association of these regional Indigenous nonprofit technology organizations. So here's a list of some of our members. We have groups in BC, Ontario, Manitoba, and elsewhere. We've participated before public hearings. So I love this photo, Penny, Tim, and I, as well as Marco Ashish from Abejuan, before the CRTC, arguing that we need to set a basic service objective for telecommunication services for everybody across Canada should be able to access 50 megabytes per second down, 10 up, and an unlimited data plan. And as well, that any funding that is made available through the regulator to help achieve that goal should be accessible to nonprofit providers such as our partners on the call today. I encourage everybody interested to check out our website at firstmile.ca. There's a lot of documentation of our work together there. There's community stories, there's public outreach. We have digital literacy resources, and I'm just in the process of updating a free online course that focuses on this work and on Indigenous-led technology development. So that course is not available now, but it will be soon. And just as a conclusion, because I want to make sure we have time to hear from the member organizations, I would say that holding a lot of this work together is community engagement. And for your perspective as planners, planning students, people involved in community planning, this idea of thinking about technology development in ways that support structured planning and dialogue around not only how digital connectivity is built, set up, owned, paid for, distributed, managed, used, right, across communities and regions, also how it supports the delivery of essential services in digital economies, and also how digital literacy gets developed and delivered. Because I think there are some interconnections between planning initiatives and digital literacy in this context. How can people be involved to contribute to community-based planning processes around technology? So thanks so much, everyone. I'll stop sharing now and look forward to hearing the other presentations.
Sally, did you want to go ahead?
Yes, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting us to this conference. I want to talk briefly about a couple of things. First off, Western James Bay, we embarked on an ambitious project to provide fiber to the home to about 1,200 communities. 1,200 homes in Attawapiskat, Fort Albany, and Shuswap. We started talking about this in 2014, and we brought together all the stakeholders in the region that would have an interest in having this kind of connectivity there, because the wireless connectivity wasn't that great. So we brought together a lot of stakeholders around the table and had several meetings with them. And I do have a PowerPoint presentation, but what I'll do is I'll send it to Travis, and perhaps he can distribute it to people who are interested. The Fiber to the Home project, we had, I don't know, about 20 stakeholder groups, they represented financial institutions, power authorities, band councils, education authorities, etc. We went up to the communities many times and talked to the people in the community about how this project was going to roll out, what sorts of cooperation we would require, and just generally talked a little bit about what they could expect in terms of impact, like the social impact, the economic impact of having a connectivity that, you know, would be on par with what you would get in a major city. So we had community information sessions in all the communities, and they were very well received. And that's really critical to get the engagement of the community, to get the community on side with what you're planning to do. Because when you're in the north, the key is cooperation. Everybody has to work together, otherwise nothing gets done. Our existing transport connectivity that we had was very one-sided. We had a link going to each community from our main shelter in Moosonee. And then when that link failed, if it failed, there was a backup link. The new fiber to the home transport there is redundancy within the network, meaning that you have information going clockwise from Moosonee in a circle to all three communities, and then you also have information going counterclockwise. So the redundancy is built in. So the key dates, understandably, COVID held everything up by about a year, but we started construction in May of 2019. And of course, we ran into problems, a couple of issues. Our project manager passed away at the construction site in the summer of 2019. So the project was held up for about a month. And then we went back in last summer. But again, we weren't able to go into the community until July, and we were only able to go into one community. So we're hoping this year we can get all three communities connected, at least two connected this year. And then Attawapskat will probably be connected by June of next year. So what this will do is it will bring every home in these communities up to the federal benchmark, which is 50 down and 10 up. And it's scalable so that we can actually increase from that. We're in negotiations right now with Bell for a better price for our bandwidth, and those negotiations are proceeding. So I think everyone knows that fiber to the home is the most effective way to deliver connectivity to homes. And the cost of this project was 4.75 million. We contributed 1.7 million ourselves. We were able to get $500,000 from the federal government, and we got 2.7 million from Northern Ontario Heritage Fund. So that's basically the fiber to the home project. And if anyone has any questions or wants to contact me, I can put my contact information in the chat. But what I wanted to briefly talk about, because I realize that you're studying planning. When infrastructure is put into a community, it's very important as planners that the conduit for future projects be put in place. These conduits can be used for a variety of things, but for our purposes, it's important to use them for fiber. I guess there was a road built from Inuvik to Tuktoyaktuk a few years back. And at that time, someone should have had the foresight to put conduit in so that fiber could be placed in there, in that pipe for connectivity to that community. And I would, as a planner, I think for every road that's built and for every transmission line that goes in, there should be an allowance made for fiber to be either laid at that time as dark fiber, or leave the conduit empty, but at least you can put fiber in later. The other thing I wanted to talk about briefly was the whole concept of when you're planning a community, consider the amount of energy that is used to bring connectivity in and out of that community. And for that reason, the CIRA, which is, and the Internet Society of Canada is trying to get internet exchange points in each community. We're trying to bring one into where one of my offices is in Timmins. We're trying to get an internet exchange point here. And what that is people are, entities like Google and Facebook are able to interface with each other in Timmins rather than the messages having to go all the way down to 121 Front Street in Toronto. So if you get internet connectivity and an IXP in your community, that is something to consider with your planning. It is, I read articles about the amount of energy that the internet uses. And they figure that the amount of energy that the internet is using now will by 2013 will probably be about 30% of the energy that we're able to produce. So that is another very interesting area of study. The other area to consider, and then I'll wrap up, is the whole idea of how the importance of policy and the importance of the business models that are being used right now to bring connectivity into Indigenous communities. The business models are not that great. They're the for-profit business models. It just doesn't make sense to provide connectivity to a remote or rural region. The not-for-profit business model works better, but the not-for-profits don't tend to get the money that the for-profits get. So those are three areas: the concept of an IXP, the concept of how much energy your planned community is going to be using and how you can conserve it, and the area of policy around business models. Those are three areas that I'm just beginning to learn more about, and it should sort of be on everyone's radar, I think. So I'll put my my email address in the chat. If anybody wants to talk to me, I'm certainly available.
Thanks, Sally. So I'll just jump in now. And I guess for my presentation, or what I would like to share and talk about is going back to the 90s. I do have a long history of planning broadband for First Nations, mostly in the north, but really other First Nations across Ontario. So it is very challenging. In the late 90s, just to quickly tell a little story, we were a small organization in Sulakot, Ontario, which is a small town. There's a couple tribal councils, mainly because we're the hub of the north where many of the remote First Nations come for their services. So we have a board that are chiefs. So when in the 90s, we decided that we would we would jump on a bus and drive to Toronto and to Ottawa to meet with anybody that would talk to us in Parliament or in larger organizations. So at that time, we were able to go to the Heart Institute, and we saw telemedicine for the first time. They were connecting to Northwest Territories. And so our chiefs, who are from small remote communities in Northern Ontario, are like, why can't we have that for healthcare? Why do we have to always fly out our community members to larger hospitals for healthcare? Why can't we bring healthcare home? So that was sort of our start of planning. We were, we came back home, and us technicians that worked under the Tribal Council for the First Nation communities, we just worked together and started thinking, how do we get better connectivity to the north? So we also had an educator who was trying to share information to teachers in the school, and dial-up was so slow that she ended up sending her floppy disks, which maybe some of you were born after we had floppy disks. And then she sent floppy disks to communities, and that's how teachers were able to get the resources that they need. So that's sort of what kicked our planning. In 2000, our tribal council was successful in getting a national project to start building broadband to 5 First Nation communities. So we worked with Bell. Bell is the monopoly in the north to serve the towns and First Nations. So we worked with Bell to build up their infrastructure. So back then it was just T1 technology, and then hard to, in communities where we couldn't provide T1 technology through Bell, we did C-band satellite. So, I mean, so the most important part of that is to build those anchor tenants that Sally did reference, like the schools, the health centers, the services that are serving the community. Those are important pieces to delivering connectivity to a community. So really, first mile, it was important for us to also be part of the consortium at First Mile, because we were just a small group, us maybe back then a staff of 5, and we couldn't really answer many of the CRTC requests. So we needed to really work together with other groups to share our model. Like we were in areas where telcos do not build out to, and that's really still true today. So like just to fast track, we were like over the years, as demands for broadband, to meet the demands, we did get to build fiber to 20 of our communities. So there was lots of capacity for about 5 years, and then about 2 years ago, we could not order any larger circuits from Bell, and they said that is because their equipment is out of capacity, but they would not reinvest back into their network. So we have to then apply for funding to build out the network again. So really, it just means that telcos, they don't really have a business case in rural and remote communities, and it's really up to the communities to take ownership of the network, and so they can have the broadband they need to deliver services in their communities. In the 20 years that we have been delivering connectivity, we've been able to deliver healthcare, telemedicine at the health center, connections to the school, and now they all have Google Chrome classrooms. The telemet, we manage bandwidth. So sorry for jumping all over the place. So communities, 10 years ago, they're using T1 circuits. So that was 1.5 megs to the whole community. And then the communities have networks, and then they connect homes, health centers, and schools. Today, communities are using 200 to 1,000 megs of internet. I mean, there's such a big demand for bandwidth that we have to continue to support building the network to these communities. And so when we go to larger telcos, there really is no interest yet to do that. So we have to do it on our own. And that's through applying to funding, broadband funding applications. So yeah, I think that's all I want to really share today, was how important it is that the communities take on these initiatives. And through KNET, we've been able to support many communities to do this, but it's really important that the communities develop their own networks. They're able to, manage manage connections to the home. They're able to, so we're creating new jobs in the community. The money's staying in the community, so then they're able to shop at the local stores. And, it is definitely a big business model. But, if a telco is supporting the community, the money is leaving the community. Thank you.
Thanks, Penny. I'm just going to bring up my PowerPoint here, my PDF. Everybody see that? Okay. Again, good morning, everybody. My name is Tim Wojtek. I'm an Algonquin member of the Kitigan-Zibi Algonquin community, which is located in Western Quebec, just north of Ottawa, for about 2-hour drive. I've been working in Wendake, which is in Quebec City, for the last 17 years now. Time flies when you're having fun. I've been hired here since the beginning to manage the First Nations SchoolNet program, which is where a lot of the collaboration across Canada started, like with Penny's group, KNET, the Atlantic region. This is where we came to really collaborate with one another to share our expertise and strategies on how to enhance connectivity. So that's where it all began. Like even Penny's group began earlier than we did. But that's when we started here in Quebec. Our organization, the First Nations Education Council, is a First Nations Education Council management organization for the 22 member communities that you see here. Approximately, I would say 60% are Francophone communities and 40 Anglophone. So we have a bilingual environment that we support our members. Gaining the technology mandate in 2004 really brought us to the how would you say, becoming more involved in the advocacy of technology improvements, policy and all that. So this is where we got into research. As Rob said before, there's research in our activities, which really led up to the FMCC work and the work we're doing to advocate to CRTC some of the issues that we have in deploying broadband. So the current intervention, Rob could probably expand upon if there's a question, is the infrastructure issues that we run into. Often when we try to install fiber in the community, a lot of the pole infrastructure is old or never touched, never maintained. So when we go to install a fiber on it, they want us to change the pole at our cost to add a fiber line. So that's really not fair to the community. And we're hoping that's going to change with CRTC being aware of these issues that we have. So that's one example of what we're doing. I really, really appreciate that mechanism for First Nations to have, to go to CRTC, to bring those issues to the forefront of CRTC. That's been, for me, I don't know what you call it, but the achievement in the work that I do, having an ability to advocate at the level that we need to advocate at to advance telecommunications and the work involved in doing it. So that said, I just want to talk maybe, Rob, about the operations funds that we brought up to CRTC also, which they did not approve at the time, but I'll speak to the high cost serving areas that Sally spoke about for the fiber to the home projects we have in Obijuwan, which is located right in the center of Quebec here, and Wematashi. So these are really isolated communities. They have Abijawan has over 180 kilometers of transport to maintain, high cost. And he's a nonprofit business structure, and he's just meeting his requirement, and he's needing help actually to develop capacity, expertise, like even manager expertise to help operate his network. So that's one thing, and that comes back to the operational thing, right? So I'll continue. So just to summarize some of the services we do at FNEC, in addition to the education envelope, of course, we do connectivity development and support, help desk and consultation support, technology initiatives, projects such as equipment initiatives when we have the opportunity, like smart boards, right? If there's an opportunity to engage schools, iPad, MDMs, and smart boards, and Zoom Office 365, and licensing and procurement. Some of the development issues that we had with connectivity, as Sally mentioned already, is we're working against telcos often in terms of trying to get infrastructure out to First Nations. And we were involved in a project here recently where the province was building a road, and we were encouraging the province to include a fiber study in the road so that they could put the infrastructure while they build the road. Make a lot of sense. But as soon as the incumbent telco came into play, that was out of the picture. So again, if the work in policy really needs to be improved upon, so that whenever there's like Sally mentioned, whenever there's an infrastructure build, include technology assessment in it, so that if it's really cost effective to do it then, instead of coming back later, right? And it just makes total sense to do it at that time. So here you see, I'm not going to get into detail here, but you see, I tried to put it into categories. We have connectivity, development and support, operations and maintenance. We do the maintenance of these networks in public sector. I'm talking here mainly about public sector. We do a lot of licensing and special projects for the communities. So where it all began for us, since we're talking about planning, is that we had to do some kind of position document for FNEC and for the member communities at the time. So we started way back in 2007, actually, where we developed a broadband visionary document, which included some really high level costs for fiber in the communities. And we had a target then that for all public sectors, we would install fiber optics. So that's where our visionary document came. It took a while to get partners with us to begin supporting the work. But I'm glad today these government partners are real partners to develop broadband, and they're really relying on us to do the work now. So they're really clear on our initiative, and they're really supportive of the work. The funds are not always consistent in doing the work, because these are proposal based. They're like every year we have to go out for a proposal to construct fiber for these public sectors. So this is something that we hope it'll be more stable type of thing, but there you go. Here's a brief picture of the connectivity in the communities we support. Some of these numbers are outdated, but the most part, all our communities are landed at 500 megabits. So you see here, the ones on the right, they need to be changed. So we have three providers in Quebec that we deal with: Bell, TELUS, and Telebec. And to facilitate all the management of these contracts and economies of scale, we manage the contracts for these communities as well. So there you go. And you also see some residential stats on what's available in the communities. Just to touch upon something this year, of course, with COVID, we really were taken aback of the demands from the schools. Just last month, just to give you an idea, with our ticketing system, we're getting 200 requests on the ticket system, not including all the phone calls that we're getting. So it's really been a heavy year for technical needs. And however, with the work we did with the technical guide early on, like I think this was released in June or July, it helped us really get an idea of what schools were using or needing at the time for a learning management system, and what FNEC was able to do in terms of service offering to the community. So it's a really timely document that helped us do the work that was needed to get schools ready for an online environment in the fall. So that said, basically the guide consisted of tools for the communities, the Internet of Communities, what it means, video conferencing tools, some descriptions of the LMSs available out there, and which LMSs that FNEC is able to do, like Office 365, for example. We're able to do that now. So, but it takes time to set up, right, and all that. So all that said, we have 16 schools now using Office 365 and more to come. We have schools using Google for Education, for example, but they're wanting to come back to Teams because they're hearing about, you know, what other schools are doing. So we're just trying to get an idea of that, what's needed. Here are just some points of moving forward, but basically is to continue our work, and training is a big demand for schools and for communities for that matter, as we update them in the tools that they're using. We often find ourselves, whenever we, you know, connect the building with fiber, now they have access, right? So they want Office 365, they want all the tools. So we're able to give them some of it, but, and you know, the question is training has to be attached to it as well. So training is important that we include in every plan that we do, because our goal is to transfer that knowledge to the community so they're autonomous, right? It's all about autonomy in the community, getting them to manage as much as possible. We're just there to support it and make it easier for them, and support it in a way where it's, how would you say, effective in time. For example, the CRTC registration for non-dominant is done by us. Each community doesn't have to bother with that because we do it for them. So it's a lot effective, more effective that way. I know I'm coming out of time here, but okay, I guess I'm at the end of it. So some of the final points, I guess, is just to talk about the planning with communities. The FNEC does have a 5-year plan, and we're ratifying that now, and we're going to be presenting it to our members in April. And one of those objectives is governance, IT governance in the communities. It's really important to include everybody in those discussions so that that everyone's involved in maximizing, you know, the resources that they put into technologies. The connectivity that we do is, how would you say, physically geared that way anyway, right? It's centralized to a common point. So the governance has to be sort of, you know, not following it, but geared towards that. So for example, a training, right? Why not do a training for all sectors, right? So it makes a lot of sense. So we're hoping to include that in our work for the next year or so. But the 5-year plan for us is basically to support schools and community infrastructures, and to support those, how do you say, not gray zone clients. I call them gray zone because we're not mandated to support them, but we do support them anyway, but try to do our best to give them a resource, a stable resource for the support they need. So I think that's my time. Thank you.
So if anyone has any questions at all for our panelists here, they can put them in the Q&A box in the bottom of the screen here. I don't know if you had any questions prepared for them, Rob, if you want to ask away. Otherwise, we can try to come up with something here.
Sure. Why don't I just get started? Because today, I don't know if everybody watching is aware, but it's National Day of Action for Affordable Internet. And I just wanted to ask the panelists about that. Just from your experience, could you speak about the affordability challenge in your communities and maybe how you're going to be, you know, how your work helps address that as nonprofits?
I can speak to that. So as we buy larger circuits, it is actually becoming more expensive rather than cheaper. So typically, our understanding of buying more bandwidth, it becomes cheaper by the meg. But in the last couple of years, as Bell has continued to buy other telcos, and there's been shifts. And now that we order like 10 gig circuits or 1 gig complete, full circuits, the cost per meg has gone up. So those are costs that we have to pass on to the end customers. So instead of them buying a cheaper circuit, a cheaper connection, it is actually more expensive. And most of our end customers are in remote communities, so it is very expensive to live, high cost of food and hydro. So yeah, so even though 5010 is important, they're right now they have their kids are at home learning, they're working from home, so connectivity is important to them. It does become more expensive for them. Thank you.
Rob, I can speak to that a little bit. There's under the agreements that we signed with the government and with the province, there was the expectation that our prices to the end user would not exceed 10% of the closest center or municipality. And in our case, the closest center was Cochrane. So we looked at what Cochrane was charging, and we looked at, okay, how do we stay within those parameters? So there's that expectation on that side, and then there's the other expectation on the part of the consumer that the price is going to be less because we're kind of cutting out the middleman, because Western James Bay is going to be handling all the billing. So I know exactly what Penny's talking about. So as our cost of goods sold rises as opposed to going down, usually when you buy more of something, it's cheaper. But in the case of buying bandwidth, it is not. Because what the telcos do is they fold in all their core equipment upgrades into the cost of anyone who's asking for more bandwidth. So you have, we're in a squeeze play where you have the cost of goods sold is going up, but there's the expectation of the government that you're going to somehow be able to offer a price to the end user that is within a certain percentage point of what the nearest municipality is charging. So that's a consideration for sure. The other thing too is where the whole idea of bringing internet connectivity into a community is so that they can participate in the economy. And by and large, a lot of people that live in these communities, the average, income is far below the poverty line. So that's the other consideration we have to take into account. Is there's no point in bringing a service into the community that people simply cannot afford. So those are all issues around affordability, and it's incumbent upon people, managers like myself and Penny and Tim, to make sure that we have enough resources, that we charge enough to the client, that we have enough resources to maintain our network in case something goes wrong. So yeah, that's sort of a few of the issues that I see around affordable access.
Maybe just one point quickly. I spoke about the high cost serving communities. whereas 180 kilometers of transport, it's the community that's taken the responsibility to maintain that, because it's a nonprofit, type of structure. So that cost transfers to the client, right? So their costs are by default higher because of that length of transport. So this is why we were arguing for a fund in Ottawa that these communities can apply to make it equal, give them a chance to make it competitive, not competitive, but you know what I mean, more favorable for a community to continue. So right now, this is the message that we were trying to do to all of the interveners, policies, because these communities are having challenges in doing that.
I just saw the question in the chat about the proposed Rogers-Shaw merger. If everyone's okay, I could speak to it briefly and then open it up to others. I think that the first thing is we're not sure on the outcomes of that merger. Like, it's going to go under review with the Competition Bureau, so we'll see. I did see that as a component of it, Rogers did mention a fund set aside for Indigenous communities to develop their own ISPs as well. So as a condition of this deal. So that's an interesting component of it, but of course this information just came out yesterday, so we haven't had a chance to really think about that too much. But I did notice that in their discussions of the materials that they had raised the issue of limited connectivity in rural and remote and Indigenous communities. Does anyone else want to speak to that merger at all, or potential implications?
For Quebec, there's no presence of Rogers or Shaw, so it doesn't apply really here.
So for the way I see it is that, and I could be wrong in this, is that Bell has a monopoly. But what happens with Rogers and Shaw joining forces is, I think maybe they're in a position to really compete with Bell much more effectively now that they have joined forces. But I think Rob is right. This may go to the Competition Bureau. This is very new. So I haven't really been able to do a lot of research on it. But I think what may filter down is that the CRTC may be asking for interventions from interested groups as to what we see the effects might be. It's very sexy these days to put in a provision that you're going to allocate funds to First Nations and remote and rural communities. And I think that is just a way to get your proposal looked upon more favorably. I've seen this before where promises are made, but we've seen Bell do it in the past. And what happens is, yes, they say they're going to put money into remote and rural communities, but what they end up doing is investing money in their core services in the urban centers, and so that the remote and rural communities can be served. And basically what the remote communities get is the crumbs that kind of fall off the table, where what we need to do is flip this over and have the funds actually go to the communities themselves, rather than, just take whatever scraps fall off after the core equipment has been upgraded. So been there, done that. So we'll just have to see what happens But I really think that if there's any way we can hold the big telcos feet to the fire on this, I really think we should make them do what they say they're going to do. But I don't hold up much hope for that.
It looks like we might just have enough time from all of our panelists here. If you have any concluding remarks that you'd like to bestow upon us, that'd be great.
Okay, maybe I'll start. I encourage everybody to visit the affordable, the National Day of Action for Affordable Internet. I think our panelists here identified that while like the consumer issues are very important, the high cost of internet, I think it's really important to consider from a holistic planning perspective, these kinds of ideas around thinking about costs of energy, the energy costs, the whole community approach where you have a dig once policy for including broadband internet in all planning initiatives, like these kinds of things, the governance aspects of it, and supporting those nonprofit business models. And I really do think that planners have an important role to play in the design and support of Indigenous community networks and even internet infrastructures more generally. So thanks for the opportunity to present today.
And in closing, I just want to say that I think in the 20 plus years that First Nation networks have been delivering and planning and delivering connectivity to their community, to their member communities, that like we are able to do it. Like we have proven, and we have a voice out there, and we don't really want to be taken care of. Like we have been able to build our own capacity within our communities, within our aggregate networks, and I think it's a model that really it works for First Nations, but it could also work for rural communities that aren't getting the service today. Thank you.
I'm just thinking in closing, it's a good idea as community planners to look at the economic impacts of connectivity in remote and rural communities. It's wise to consider doing an economic impact study prior to bringing connectivity in, and then maybe doing another study a couple of years down the line after the connectivity has been brought in. And my philosophy is that we shouldn't leave anybody behind. Everybody should have an opportunity to participate in the economy, to our culture, our way of life here in Canada. And I think that we leave communities behind at our peril. We really need to make sure everybody has access to connectivity and the resources they need to be a participating member of our society.
Just one last point, perhaps, in the work we do is it's important to identify risks. We try to do that in every work we do, and often we hit risks in area of capacity, availability of resources locally. For example, Office 365, right? You need a local technician. Okay, red flag. You keep going down the list. So training is another risk, right? You have resources to do that at the end during your plan. So really important that you include a risk component to your planning to make sure that you address, I think everybody knows that, but for our work, it's really important because we need to make sure that we have a stable, a really concrete plan in making communities not only feeling supported, but supported in the work that they need to do also. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you again, Penny, Tim, Sally, and Rob for this. This was really great. I definitely had some mental notes when we we're going through that. We've had a session yesterday about access to health, one tomorrow about the way school is going to changing. So I definitely see how this ties into a lot of the stuff we're talking about this week and planning in general. So if anyone else would like to look at the session afterwards or like to share with anyone, it should go on our YouTube channel sometime within the next week or so, depending on technology and how able we're to facilitate that. And we also have a number of other sessions this week. Again, one starting immediately following this one now, as well, all the way through till Friday. So once again, we're going to thank our panelists and Rob for joining us today. And now we're going to move over to our next panelist, and we'll just switch our screen around from the four joined us for this session to our next round for the Parks and Recreation session coming up right now.
Thanks to all of you.
Thank you. All right, so I see Ryan and Jessica right now, just waiting for Sunya. There we are. So I'm just going to make this really brief for those of you who are sticking with us through both sessions, but I just like to once again acknowledge that the SHIFT conference is occurring on Mi'kma'ki, the traditional and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. And our conference was open yesterday. We like to always thank Jerry for opening our conference for us, who did that yesterday with a blessing. And a thank you again to our sponsors, the Atlantic Planners